Imagine you live in Mexico City. You have been a football fan your entire life. Your father watched Pelé at the Azteca in 1970. Your grandfather told that story at the dinner table for decades. You grew up with Maradona's 1986 final, the way other people grow up with fairy tales. Not something that happened to someone else, but something that happened here, on your street, in your city, in the stadium that is 20 minutes from where you sleep. And now, 56 years after Pelé and 40 years after Maradona, the World Cup is back. In your city, at your stadium. And you cannot afford a ticket. Not because you made a bad decision, not because you didn't plan ahead. Because the cheapest available ticket for the opening match, Mexico versus South Africa, your team, your ground, your moment, costs more than 3 times your monthly salary on the official resale market. And the real market, the one on StubHub, has non-VIP seats listed at $16,769. In a city where the average monthly pension is $1,000. That is what the 2026 World Cup looked like from inside Mexico City on June 11th. Not from the corporate suites, not from the FIFA hospitality zone, from the city. Mexico did win, by the way. Jimenez scored in the 9th minute. Raúl Jiménez added a second and dedicated it in tears to his late father. 3 red cards. Final score 2-0. The Azteca erupted. The television coverage was spectacular. And none of that is the story I want to tell today because while that match was being played inside the stadium, something else was happening outside of it. Something that 87,000 fans with tickets didn't see. Something that the cameras broadcasting to 6 billion people didn't linger on. Outside Gate 8 of the Estadio Azteca, approximately 200 masked individuals broke away from a group of around 800 demonstrators and threw rocks at police officers, then bottles, then Molotov cocktails. Several officers required medical assistance. A truck parked near the venue was damaged. Riot police moved in, pushed the crowd back, and deployed tear gas. Lines of officers remained stationed around the stadium gates for the rest of the evening, while inside, Shakira performed the official tournament anthem and the crowd sang along. Think about what that image contains. Shakira on one side of a wall, Molotov cocktails on the other. I have covered the mechanics of this World Cup's problems for weeks now. The visa denials, the contract disputes, the Infantino-Trump entanglement. But I want to step back from all of that today because the Mexico City story is something different in kind. It is not a story about geopolitics or governance or FIFA's relationship with the White House. It is a story about a city and the tournament that arrived in that city and what those two things looked like side by side. And what they looked like was not a celebration. It was a contrast. A sharp, uncomfortable, entirely visible contrast between the World Cup that FIFA was broadcasting to the planet and the city that was hosting it. The protests did not begin on June 11th. They began weeks earlier, and they were not about the World Cup specifically. The CNTE, Mexico's dissident teachers union, launched a national strike on June 1st. Their demands were specific and documented: a full doubling of salaries and the reversal of pension laws introduced in 2007 that stripped public school teachers of their pension rights. These are teachers, people who earn a modest income in a country where the average monthly salary in the formal sector sits somewhere around 16,000 to 18,000 pesos, roughly 800 to 900 US dollars. People who had their pension system restructured by law without their consent, and who have been trying through every available channel to get it reversed. The timing placed them directly in collision with FIFA's preparations. The Zócalo, Mexico City's historic central plaza, the square that sits in front of the National Palace, one of the most symbolically significant public spaces in the entire country, had been chosen as the location for the official FIFA Fan Fest. FIFA's plan was to install giant screens, a stage, food vendors, a festival atmosphere where fans could gather to watch matches on the opening day and throughout the tournament. Tens of thousands of people were supposed to fill that square on June 11th, watching Mexico's opening game on a massive screen, celebrating together. The teachers got there first. They set up a protest camp in the Zócalo. They brought tents and signs and bodies and the collective weight of a union that had been fighting for wage parity for years. And then they were met with metal barriers, concrete blocks, and riot police. The Guardian reported that on June 1st, 10 days before the opening ceremony, Mexican police deployed tear gas against the teachers as they advanced toward the Zócalo. One demonstrator, according to union leaders, lost an eye. 5 were injured in that confrontation. The FanFest installations, the FIFA screens, the festival infrastructure, it was all there, going up around them as the police moved in. Let that sit for a moment. A teacher in Mexico City lost an eye trying to march toward the square where FIFA was installing its entertainment infrastructure. By June 8th, DW was reporting that the teachers had successfully occupied the Zócalo and were vowing to continue. The Mexico City Chamber of Commerce estimated that disruptions in the area had already cost the private sector nearly 20 million euros in lost business. President Claudia Sheinbaum, who had been set to personally attend the FanFest opening on June 11th, told reporters on June 10th that she was uncertain whether the event could proceed at its original location. The FanFest, the centerpiece of FIFA's public celebration in Mexico City, was at risk of being canceled on the eve of the opening match because the square it was planned around had been occupied by striking teachers who wanted their pensions back. The ESPN report from June 9th added a detail that I find particularly revealing. Beyond the CNTE, the Mexican government confirmed that 19 separate social movements had announced plans to protest in Mexico City during the week of the World Cup inauguration. 19. Educators, families of victims of violence, judges protesting judicial reforms, other unions, other grievances. Each one distinct, each one with its own history, but all of them converging on the same week, the same city, the same public spaces that FIFA had claimed for its tournament. Al Jazeera described it precisely. Mexico City was bracing for celebrations and protests simultaneously as the World Cup opened. This is the part of the story that doesn't fit into the usual World Cup narrative. The usual narrative is, country is chosen, country prepares, country celebrates, country hosts. The messiness, the real messiness, the institutional failures and social tensions that any major city carries, gets managed into the background. FIFA's promotional materials don't include tear gas and Molotov cocktails. The broadcast package doesn't cut away to the streets outside the stadium. The tournament proceeds, and usually the city lets it. Usually the World Cup is large enough, exciting enough, economically significant enough that the discomfort gets absorbed into the celebration. What happened in Mexico City in the days and hours before June 11th suggests something different was happening. The protests weren't absorbed. They were contained by police, by barriers, by tear gas, but not resolved. The teachers were still in the Zócalo when the opening ceremony started. The FanFest happened eventually, but in a location hemmed in by metal barriers that had been designed to keep protesters out. Al Jazeera noted that the local government announced on social media that the site was at capacity and advised fans to seek alternative locations. Outside the fan zone, fans tried to enter and were turned away. Bottles were thrown at police by people trying to get in. One witness, a 20-year-old named Metziel, told reporters simply, "It's chaotic." But let me stay at the Azteca one moment longer, because the gap between what this building is and what surrounded it on June 11th has a specific quality that I want to name. In 1970, when Pelé played his final World Cup on that pitch, Mexico City was a different city. A city of 9 million people, not 22. A city where a working-class family could save for a few months and buy tickets to watch the greatest footballer alive lift a trophy 30 rows in front of them. The sport was expensive. It was not inaccessible in the structural way it has become in 2026. In 1986, Mexico City was recovering from an earthquake that had killed thousands just the year before. The peso had collapsed. The country was in economic turmoil, and yet Mexico hosted the World Cup anyway, stepping in at short notice after Colombia withdrew. And the tournament produced what is still regarded as the greatest individual footballing performance in the sport's history. Maradona. The hand of God and the goal of the century in the quarterfinal, the final at the Azteca. An entire nation pressed around television sets and stadium gates. What I find significant is this. In 1986, with a collapsing currency and post-earthquake reconstruction still underway, a Mexican family could find a way to the Azteca. In 2026, with a World Cup specifically designed to include Mexico as a co-host, with FIFA's revenue projected at $11 billion for this single tournament, the people of Mexico City cannot afford the opening match. That is not a coincidence. That is a policy outcome. Somebody set those prices. Somebody approved dynamic pricing for the first World Cup, in which it was applied. Somebody decided that market rates at the most prestigious moment in this stadium's history should be set according to what the international buyer market would bear, rather than what the local population could afford. And the local population, the one that has carried the memory of this stadium for 56 years, that learned to love football on these streets, got 1,000 tickets at $60 per match as their share of the celebration. 1,000 in a stadium of 87,000. I have tried to find a way to make that ratio sound acceptable. I cannot. Now, let me talk about the tickets, because the tickets are inseparable from this story. The protest outside the stadium on June 11th was not just anti-government demonstrators with political grievances. It included people who wanted to watch their team's opening World Cup match and could not get in. Not because the stadium was sold out, though it was. Because the price of entry had been set at a level that made it functionally inaccessible to the majority of the people living in the city surrounding it. CNN reported in May that when FIFA released its second round of ticket sales in April, prices for the opening match in Mexico on June 11th ranged from $3,000 to $10,000. $3,000 to $10,000 on official channels. The Reuters explainer from March documented that official opening match tickets ranged from roughly $530 at the low end to $2,735 at the top of FIFA's tiered pricing structure. But by April's second release, CNN was reporting those numbers had increased to $3,000 to $10,000 in the official market. And on StubHub, the non-VIP resale price reached $16,769 per ticket. I want to put those numbers alongside a single fact. The average monthly pension in Mexico City is approximately $1,000. A retired person living on that income, watching their city host the World Cup for the third time in its history, would need to spend between 3 and 16 months of their entire income to attend the opening match. One ticket, one match, their team, their stadium. The Malay male spoke to the Rueda family in Mexico City, 3 generations of football fans. Fernando watched Pelé at the Azteca in 1970. Jairo watched Maradona in 1986. Now they cannot attend the 2026 opening match because the entry price exceeds what their household earns in months. I enjoyed the 1970 and 1986 World Cups in person, one resident told CNN. But I cannot attend this third World Cup. How can someone earning a monthly salary of $1,000 afford a $10,000 ticket? That is not a rhetorical question. It has no good answer. The Australian ABC reported a former FIFA official saying the organization is prioritizing profit over fans, a statement that would have been unremarkable from a critic, but carries weight coming from someone inside the institution. The official noted that top-tier seats for the final have reached nearly $16,000, an increase of almost 600% compared to the Qatar 2022 final. FIFA's response to questions about pricing in Mexico has been consistent. The organization stated it adopted a sales and market model that aligns with standard practices for major sporting and entertainment events in host nations, and noted that tickets starting at $60 were made available, with at least 1,000 per match reserved through national associations. 1,000 tickets at $60 for a tournament in a city of 22 million people, in a stadium with a capacity of 87,000. Let that sentence do the work it needs to do. The Rueda family that the Malay male interviewed, 3 generations, grandfather to grandchild, all of them football people, all of them Mexico City people, is the unit of measurement that matters here, not the average ticket price, not the percentage increase from Qatar 2022. The Rueda family, sitting in their house 20 minutes from the Azteca, watching on television the third World Cup their stadium has hosted, because the ticket costs more than their grandfather earns in 3 months. That family is the story. Everything else is the context. And what makes it hurt in a particular way is the geography. They are not watching from another country, another city, another context. They are watching from inside the shadow of the stadium itself. The stadium where their grandfather watched Pelé. The stadium where their father watched Maradona. That specific, irreplaceable, unrepeatable connection between a family and a place. FIFA monetized it, and the family stayed home. Now I want to come to the Azteca itself, because the stadium is the thing that makes this story something more than a policy argument, and I don't want to leave it without saying what it actually is. The Estadio Azteca is the only football stadium in the world to have hosted 3 separate FIFA World Cups. That is not a close comparison. No other ground is second. On June 11, 2026, the Azteca became the first stadium in history to host a World Cup opening ceremony 3 times. In 1970, Pelé lifted the trophy on that pitch with Brazil's greatest team, defeating Italy 4-1 in the final. In 1986, Diego Maradona scored the hand of God and the goal of the century against England in the quarterfinal on that same turf. Arguably the 2 most debated goals in the history of the sport, from the same player, in the same match, on the same ground. Then, 16 days later, Maradona lifted the trophy there too, as Argentina defeated West Germany in the final. The Azteca already accounts for 2 World Cup finals, 2 previous opening ceremonies, the game of the century from 1970, the hand of God, and the goal of the century. There is no stadium on Earth with a comparable accumulation of football mythology concentrated in one place. And on June 11, 2026, while Shakira performed on its pitch and 87,000 fans celebrated inside it, masked individuals were throwing Molotov cocktails at police officers outside Gate 8 of that same ground. A teachers' union was occupying the Zocalo 6 kilometers away, having been tear-gassed multiple times in the preceding weeks. 19 social movements had announced protests in the city. The Fan Fest was surrounded by metal barriers. The cheapest available ticket cost more than 3 months of the average Mexican pension. That is the Azteca in 2026. The most historically significant football venue on Earth, hosting its greatest moment yet, while the city around it expressed, in the most direct language available, that the party was not for them. I'm not saying this to diminish what happened on the pitch. Quiñones' goal in the 9th minute in front of 87,000 of his countrymen is one of those moments that football produces and nothing else can. The noise inside that stadium when Mexico scored was real, and it was extraordinary, and I would not take it from anyone who was there. But I keep thinking about the families, 3 generations of football fans in Mexico City, the ones who watched Pelé in 1970 and Maradona in 1986, and could not go this time because the ticket costs more than their monthly income. I keep thinking about the teacher with the head injury from the June 1st confrontation. I keep thinking about the person described by Times of India as receiving CPR from medics outside the stadium, suffering what appeared to be a heart attack while trying to make his way through the crowds to the gates. FIFA built the largest World Cup in history. 48 teams, 104 matches, 3 nations, 16 cities. The Estadio Azteca, the most iconic ground on the planet, hosting its 3rd opening ceremony. The production was extraordinary. The investment was enormous. The ambition was genuine. And the city that has lived in the shadow of that stadium for 60 years, that has carried the memory of Pelé and Maradona in its streets and conversations and family stories for 5 and 6 decades, that city watched most of it through a fence. I don't know where the line is between a World Cup being a genuine gift to the place it lands in and a spectacle that happens to use that place as a backdrop. I don't think FIFA has ever had to answer that question honestly because the question has never been asked this loudly before. But in Mexico City on June 11th, the answer the city gave was not ambiguous. It just wasn't the answer that made the broadcast.